Hi everyone, welcome to Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. I'm Rajni Bharara, your host, and today we have a topic that strikes at the very heart of the American dream: birthright citizenship, a legal principle rooted in the 14th Amendment. It has long been a cornerstone of US immigration policy, but now it's under fire. Now, before I say more about it, I would like to read out this very important disclaimer, which is here on the screen. By watching our videos, you agree and understand that the information provided by our experts and attorneys, including comments and replies from users, is not legal advice. Use of information is at your own risk. All right, after this very important disclaimer, welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to dive into a very important topic, like I said. And to talk about that topic, we have none other than Jonathan Wasden, a renowned immigration litigation attorney with years of experience navigating the complex intersection of law and policy. Together, we'll unpack the implications of the lawsuit challenging President Trump's policies and its potential ripple effects on immigrant communities. What's at stake? How might this case shape the future of citizenship rights in America? And most importantly, what does this mean for immigrants today and in the years to come? So, without any further ado, let me give a very warm welcome to John. So, John, welcome back to Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. It's always a pleasure having you. And today we have a very important topic to talk about. So, welcome back again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. John, without wasting any time, I directly would like to jump into my very first question, which is that is Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship constitutional?
I don't think there's very many people who think it is. I think the general consensus is this is something he did just to beat his chest and show his anti-immigrant following that he's doing something. So the general consensus, like I say, is that this will more than likely be invalidated by a court, and it'll be the end of it. Now, in the interim, until that happens, the real impact is going to be, if you're applying for a passport for a newly born child, the State Department may not issue it right away until a court order comes down telling them that this executive order is unconstitutional.
Okay, but John, can a president really change who becomes an American president? Oh, sorry, American citizen?
No, it's governed by the Constitution and it's governed by statute. And to the extent that the Constitution doesn't contemplate every possibility, the statute takes over. What Trump and his administration are trying to do is they're taking the very, very clear language in the 14th Amendment that says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state where they reside. What they're saying is that and subject to the jurisdiction thereof clause somehow allows them to prevent the people being born in the country who are born to non-permanent residents and non-US citizenship. But when you look at the history of that clause, what they're really referring to is diplomats who have diplomatic immunity, who are not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And diplomats' kids, when they're born in the US, have never been granted US citizenship. And so, they're really pushing against common sense, the plain language of the law, and also history. And there's just really no angle that they can take on this that's going to be appealing to a court.
Okay. But then why do you think they did it in the first place? Like, why did they think about doing it if it's not going to go forward?
Yeah, so I mean, Trump's base, they are very upset about illegal immigration from the southern border, and that's understandable. Especially, if you're living along a border state, that's an issue that you're going to be voting on and you want tougher enforcement on. They were also keyed in and aware of the fact that there have been clinics and hospitals set up, mostly catering to Chinese clientele, where the Chinese clientele will come on a visitor visa shortly before baby's due, have the baby here, recuperate, get citizenship for their child, and then go home. And those are the two scenarios that they're trying to prevent and they're trying to stop, is the illegal immigration and the birther tourism, for lack of a better term. But in the mix, anybody who's on a non-immigrant visa here legally and lawfully is also most likely going to be impacted by this executive order in the interim.
Okay. Okay. But then, John, also I would like to know from you that how could the government legally stop granting automatic citizenship to children born in the US?
So I think the way that they will do that, the only way they really can do that is through the issuance of passports or the non-issuance of passports. And so, if you were to apply for a passport for your child right now, proving citizenship would be an issue potentially if you're a non-immigrant or you don't have legal status, until that court order comes down saying, no, this is not legitimate.
Okay. But then has the 14th Amendment ever been challenged in a similar way before?
No, probably because it's so clear on its face, nobody's ever thought that this was a good idea to do. Just looking at the language of the 14th Amendment, it's abundantly clear. And it's, the history of it shows that it was designed to grant citizenship to anybody born in the US, regardless of the status of their parents. So, the people that it affected back in the day were not documented aliens, right? They didn't come here with a visa. Their parents didn't come here with a visa, rather, and they were born to people who didn't have visas or legal status other than slaves. And so to say that the executive order has found some gaping loophole in the 14th Amendment is kind of stretching it a lot, actually. And so I just don't see a whole lot of courts having patience and time for this. I think it's going to be something that gets kicked out very quickly probably in the first month and a half of the Trump administration. They'll take a beating on this one. But it's more of a distraction, I think, from what's going on with the grander issues within the Trump administration on immigration. And it's also indicative of where he's headed. So, there's a lot of buzz earlier about, Elon Musk saying great things about the H-1B visa, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was some optimism that maybe Trump's second time around wouldn't be so bad for immigration or legal immigration and high-skilled immigration. But, the birthright citizenship issue and the extreme vetting issue, all of that's lining up to show that no, it's just going to be just as bad as it was the first time.
Or maybe worse?
Yeah, it could be worse. I think what they learned from their last time around is, what not to do. They jumped in and rushed into a bunch of things without going through the right process. I think this time they've figured out how to game the system a little more effectively.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's wait what actually, happens there. And the first day itself had so many things coming. So we weren't really somewhere we were expecting, but we weren't really expecting this much to happen. But then let's see what really happens. But then, John, I would also like to know from you that, how might this challenge to birthright citizenship impact future presidential actions?
So probably not much, because the other court cases are going to be brought against his policies are on issues where the law is not so clear and potentially not quite so favorable to plaintiffs. The extreme vetting piece, that is something where courts are more likely to give the executive branch a lot more leeway and a lot more flexibility to accomplish their goal of protecting the U.S. So, as obvious it is as it is what they're trying to do with that extreme vetting, I think the courts are probably going to be more inclined to let that happen. And let him have his executive order on that issue.
Okay, okay. And could this set a precedent for presidents to reinterpret constitutional provisions through executive orders? Do you think?
Where they're clear like this, I don't think so. Where there's a little bit of ambiguity, there's always the possibility that they can find a loophole or they can find some exception that a court's going to agree with. But with this case, the language is so abundantly clear, the history is so abundantly clear, and the reason for the amendment is so clear. I just don't see it getting any traction with the court. Even if they get lucky and they get a Trump appointee from the first administration as a district court judge, that first trial court level, any court of appeals that hears this, I think is going to shoot it down.
Okay, okay. But John, even if, let's say, it goes through, and then what might happen to the children born in the US?
Well, that's a great question, right? Because they're born here, they've been here for a while, at least over 180 days, without any type of visa. There's no provision in the law that says that if you're born in the U.S., you're granted immediate or automatic residency status, right? Or non-immigrant status if your parents are non-immigrants. And so, what is their status? That the law doesn't anticipate what that would be because the law has always assumed that they would be citizens if they're born here. So there's a lot of questions that are going to be raised if this was, allowed to go through. And you would find the odd circumstance or the paradoxical circumstance where an infant born here in the U.S. who can't even speak would have a ground of inadmissibility for having overstayed and been in the country without authorization for more than 180 days. And that just seems incredibly crazy that they would do that, but that would be a natural consequence of, birthright citizenship being destroyed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And do you think would this create a group of children, who don't belong actually anywhere?
Possibly, yeah. But again, I don't think this is going to stand. But hypothetically, yeah, it could cause problems like that.
Okay, okay. So moving forward, I would like to also know about, how will calling cartels and gangs terrorist groups change immigration enforcement?
So when you throw out the magical T word, the terrorism word, it does loosen up certain funding within the federal government to do emergency, actions. It also gives the federal government a little bit more flexibility in what tools and what things they bring to combat the issue. By labeling it terrorism, theoretically, they're opening up activation of military to combat terrorism. Historically, if you look at it, it wouldn't be the first time that the country has brought the military in to the southern border to fight what amounts to a terrorist organization. Back in the early 1900s, there was Pancho Villa. He was a Mexican rebel that was leading border incursions across and attacking settlements on the U.S. side of the border. And we sent the American Army down there, and they had the punitive expeditions fighting in Mexico, chasing down Pancho Villa. And so there is precedent for using the military along the border. Whether or not we're going to get into that remains to be seen. I would hope not. I think that would be a catastrophe. Having been in the military, in my lifetime, I just don't see that as an operation that we would be set to excel in, because we've learned one thing from the U.S. military over the past 20 years, and that is fighting an insurgency or fighting what's called asymmetrical warfare is something that we're just not very good at, and no country's terribly good at. So it would be a catastrophe if we sent the military south of the border.
Okay, okay. But do you think also, this designation can lead to increased a legal risk of migrants, accused of association with such groups?
hmm Yeah, it does open up new grounds of inadmissibility, or it makes people, qualified to be in grounds of inadmissibility that would prevent them from getting visas or admission into the U.S. if they've been labeled. The problem with that is the way that USCIS in particular and DHS has been dealing with these issues of inadmissibility is completely illegal. What they're supposed to do when they take an adverse action against somebody is they're supposed to give them notice, they're supposed to give them opportunity to respond to the allegation, and then they're supposed to make a decision in writing and give that explaining the law and the facts that their decision is based on. What we see DHS and USCIS doing, however, is they're entering these findings in secret, not telling anybody. And the only time you ever find out about these findings is when you go to a consulate for a visa stamp or you go to the port of entry for admission. And that's when you find out that you've been, listed as inadmissible for one of these categories. And I see that all the time in regards to alleged false statements, inadmissibility based on false statements. And am suspecting that we're going to see that happening with the terrorism related grounds, is that they will just start using that incredibly freely without a whole lot of thought or discretion, and it's going to be a tool they use to eliminate a lot of people from the pool of those that can come to the U.S.
Okay, okay. Thank you for answering the question, John. Also, what could happen if military is used for border enforcement?
You know, so the border enforcement is an interesting question. It's an easier question to say, can we send the military south of the border to combat narco terrorism? Legally, yes, I think we can do that. I think, practically it would be a horrible idea. Border enforcement's another issue, though. It's quite a bit different and it's more nuanced. So there's this thing called the Posse Comitatus Act. And it goes all the way back to post Civil War when the US Army was occupying the South. And they were the law enforcement, for the South in the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. And part of the compromise of ending Reconstruction, getting the levers of power restored to the civilians in the South, was the Posse Comitatus Act that said that the U.S. military will not be allowed to enforce civil law, and they have no authority to do that in the United States. And so, the question is whether or not border enforcement, which is on our side of the border, would violate Posse Comitatus. And I think, the U.S. military could serve in a supporting role legally to CBP, like logistics and things like that, because they're not enforcing law. But once they start putting the military into an enforcement role, there becomes a whole lot of problems with the Posse Comitatus Act. And I think that's something that it's a little bit more nuanced, but I think it's also something that the administration will lose in court.
Okay, okay. So, also, how might stopping asylum and refugee admissions affect international human rights?
Yeah, so the asylum and refugee issue, it's a program that in theory is very valuable and it's very noble. What the Trump administration, I think, is responding to is pretty well documented cases of abuse of that noble policy. And there are pretty good documented cases of people that are just running these asylum mills where they give people these backstories, they prep them for these interviews based on facts that never actually happened to the person, and then they send them for their asylum or their refugee screening. And that's probably the minority of cases by far, but it's something that has happened in the past, and I think that's what they're responding to, is the abuse in the asylum system. I think for the legitimate folks that are truly impacted by oppression in their home country, it's going to be a catastrophe. They're going to be stuck in refugee camps. They're going to be stuck in their home country with really no protection or no sense of certainty of what's going to happen in their future. But again, asylum and refugee policy is something that the law does give the president a lot of discretion over and how he administers it. So it's something that's probably not going to be very easy to challenge in court.
Okay. Okay. And John, with this, I would also like to talk about, the government and workplace changes. So I would like to know from you that what might happen legally if diversity and inclusion programs are ended in federal agencies?
If there are which programs, sorry?
If diversity and inclusion programs.
City inclusion programs?
Yeah, diversity and inclusion programs.
Oh. Yeah, so the DEI stuff or yeah, I think that's any mandatory or encouragement on the federal level is going to probably end if it hasn't ended already. Individual states, individual cities, they're completely allowed to have their own policies on that. However, it remains to be seen how courts are going to handle challenges to that under the Equal Protection Clause. So as we look at the history of affirmative action and how that's fared in courts, the current Supreme Court, being very conservative, they have a view of the Equal Protection Clause that says that you can't give preference based on race to anybody, even if it is somebody who's been historically oppressed or disadvantaged. It has to be race neutral. And I think where these DEI policies are going to run into problems is, when they're giving preference to certain categories of folks and disadvantaging others, that's going to have equal protection ramifications. And that's something that, in theory, the federal government could proactively sue the municipality or the state on.
Okay, but do you think that cutting federal jobs, can face constitutional challenges?
No, it would. Let me put it this way. If Congress authorizes money, then the president's hands are limited because Congress has said this is how we want to spend our money, and this is the only way you can spend that money. So as long as Congress keeps pumping out the money, the executive branch, is in charge of spending it and has to spend it typically. If Congress is working with the executive in cutting jobs, it's very easy. There's no constitutional issue involved. The only time there becomes a constitutional issue is a separation of powers issue between Congress and the executive. If there's a disagreement there about how the law is being enforced and whether or not the executive is faithfully executing the laws that Congress has created, then that's an issue that can come about. One way that they typically are going to do things like this is not overtly. It'll be attrition, hiring freezes, pushing people out through retirement, just subtle changes in process as opposed to outright layoffs and firings to eliminate positions. So I would expect it to be death by 1,000 paper cuts as opposed to, chopping the head off the snake.
Okay. John, thank you so much for answering all these questions. With this, I would also like to know your viewpoints on that the CBP app shutting down. So I would also like to know from you that how will the sudden shutdown of the CBP One app impact nearly 1 million migrants who had scheduled legal entry appointments?
Yeah, I think it's just indicative of where the Trump administration is headed. They want to make life as difficult as possible for people trying to enter the U.S. And that's simple, full stop. They are under no obligation to make things easy. They're in charge of creating process. They're in charge of dictating how services are delivered, and if they throw up obstacles or they eliminate efficiencies, it's annoying, especially if you're an immigration lawyer or you're the person impacted. But it's something courts are not likely to get involved in and tell the executive, you know, no, this is the process you must follow. So as long as they're not overtly doing something illegal, those process type of issues tend to get a pass in court.
So then, what legal challenges can migrants potentially can take against the abrupt cancellation of their pre-approved appointments?
So not much on that. There's if they're outside the country, especially, you have very few rights when you're outside the country, and the executive branch is given a lot of authority to determine, who can enter the U.S. And if you don't have a right to enter the U.S., then you clearly don't have a right to a scheduled appointment. So I don't expect that there's going to be a whole lot of legal challenge to that aspect.
Okay, so John, also does the executive order violate any existing immigration regulation or international asylum protocols?
Well, the international asylum protocols probably, but the Trump administration has never really shown themselves to be big fans of international law, and international law is one of those things that is tough because it's all based on agreement to cooperate and to follow. And if somebody opts out of following international law, there's really not a whole lot that you can do, especially when you're the biggest kid on the block. You're the one spending money to support the UN, and you're the most powerful country in the world. There's not much people can do to punish you for violating international law and conventions like this.
Okay. And what immediate risks do migrants face after having their appointment suddenly cancelled?
Just being stuck in place where they're at. I think that's the unfortunate situation is just they're on hold and their lives are on hold while they're waiting for those appointments.
And how do you think, how might this action potentially increase unauthorized border crossings?
So, interestingly, right now, illegal border crossings that are kind of at a historic low, they're greatly decreased during the Biden administration. So I don't know how much of an effect it'll have, because typically the unauthorized border crossings are more a reflection of disruption and problems in people's home countries more than anything. And the lack of border crossings that we've seen, I think, is indicative of countries starting to get more stability and addressing their internal problems, which takes away the incentive for people to leave. So I'm not sure, how that'll play out.
Okay. And then how might courts also view the sudden revocation of scheduled legal entry appointments?
I don't think the courts will get involved in that one. I don't think there's really a legal hook to have a successful lawsuit on. Like I was saying earlier, the courts have historically given the executive branch a lot of latitude and a lot of authority to determine who is admitted into the United States. And if the courts have given that authority to determine who gets in, clearly the executive has the authority to determine who meets the first step in that process of admission, which would be those interviews.
Okay. Okay. And then how does this action align with existing US immigration laws?
So in terms of the appointment cancellations, I think US, especially under Biden, US immigration law had been trending toward a more user-friendly experience. And clearly under Trump, they're going to be retrenching. They're trying to make it as difficult as possible.
Okay. John, also, I would like to know from you that, all on that this is happening, do you think is this about fixing immigration or punishing immigrants? What do you think?
So I don't think the Trump administration and the Trump supporters have any desire to fix immigration. I think they just want to end immigration. And so I think it's all about making life as miserable as possible for people in the US or trying to come to the US is a way to discourage them from coming to the US or staying in the US. And I think that's you know a trend we'll see as long as Trump's in power, to be honest.
But then, US is a country who's built by the immigrants. And how will this work if this happens?
That is the grand irony. Not only are we a country built on immigrants, immigrant populations have historically, spawned great innovation, economic, recoveries, and success. And the problem we're having in the U.S. right now is that we have a very small number of people that are going into the hard sciences, getting degrees in things that matter, and being prepared for even college and degree programs that are valuable to the economy. And so we're not generating enough brain power in the country to sustain the economy that we currently have. And the only way that we're going to fill that gap is frankly to poach the best and brightest from other countries to come to the US and work and drive the economy. And excluding immigrants, in the Trump mind, if you keep out immigrants, then automatically somehow some kid in the US in the Midwest that didn't study hard in school is going to be qualified to be, an IT professional. And that's just not reality. You know, they didn't study hard enough in high school, they didn't study in college, they didn't prepare themselves, they got an English degree instead of a computer science degree. You know, there's just not, qualified US workers to take these roles over. And so, immigration has been a way that we've been covering that for a long time, basically since the early 90s. And if we cut that stream off, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot.
Okay. Well, also, John, with this, I would also like to know from you that do you think that with these rules coming in, we are actually changing the rules of who actually belongs to America?
So I think they're definitely trying to reshape the landscape. They want to you know, decrease the number of people that are coming. And Trump's made no secret that some immigrants are good, and then some are completely undesirable. And those good immigrants, are Northern Europeans for in Trump's mind. And so, yeah, they would definitely like to change the mix of people coming to the U.S. But frankly, I mean, anybody who's been to Europe and has seen what life in Europe is like probably isn't a whole lot, doesn't have a whole lot of motivation to come to the US, where we have very expensive healthcare, we have ridiculous working hours, and you know the lifestyle is just not very good. And so I don't think we're going to be getting the immigrants from Northern Europe that Trump sees as valuable to the US.
Okay, and also very recently I saw, I think on the inauguration day itself, I saw a tweet from Elon Musk, and where he wrote from MAGA to MEGA, I think make America great again to make Europe great again. So, what do you think this means? What do you think he meant by this?
So there's an American perception of Europe. I don't think it's terribly accurate, but the American perception of Europe is they have let so many Arab and North Africans into Europe that they've destroyed European culture. And you know, basically, it's they want to make Europe white again and eliminate those folks. And that's what you're seeing there when they make Europe great again. Is they're saying return back to your genetic European roots and stop letting those North Africans and those Arabs in.
Okay, so you mean that that whatever decisions this administration is going to take will not directly impact America, but the whole of Europe?
Well, I don't think they have a whole lot of impact over Europe. And I think most European leaders think that Trump's a bit of a buffoon. So I don't see him having a whole lot of sway over their internal policies. But the perception that certain Americans, especially in the MAGA crowd, have is that Europe is, somehow destroying itself internally by allowing immigrants to come in. That's their mindset they have about the U.S. That's the mindset they have about Europe. And you know, I think it's an unrealistic view of Europe, especially. Europeans aren't clamoring to come to the US. So they must be doing something right there.
Okay, thank you so much for answering the questions, John. I have a lot of questions from our viewers, so let me quickly take them. So I think AD Sterling is here, and AD says the ploy was to get thus into the courts so the Scotus can decide the matter. All I read is the term immigrants. If you cross into the US, that person is here illegally. Okay, I think this is a comment that he made. Do you have anything to say to him?
Is that in regards to the birthright citizenship?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think what the Trump administration is trying to say is that U.S. citizens and permanent residents that have children, those children have automatic citizenship. But if you're a non-immigrant or you're an undocumented immigrant, then your children do not get automatic citizenship. And that's the spin that they're putting on this.
Okay, and Tricia is also here, and Tricia says 93 countries have ended birthright due to the abuse of the original meaning.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have?
So, most countries, the way they handle citizenship, it's through, their legislatures, and then their parliaments. And that's a very easy change to make. If the sentiment in the country is we want to change, legislatures can do that very quickly. Our legislature in the US, not quite as efficient. We haven't actually got anything meaningful done in Congress in at least a good decade and a half. And it's just mostly been the administration, the executive branch that's been running the show. But our Constitution is the one that creates the birthright citizenship. And historically, changing the Constitution has been a very difficult, very prolonged process. And the vast majority of proposed amendments to the Constitution have failed and haven't gotten off the ground. So because it's in the Constitution and because it would take, going through all of those incredible hurdles to get an amendment done, I just don't see it happening.
Okay. And Viking for Life is also here, and Viking says UK got rid of birthright citizenship a long time ago. Two illegal aliens couldn't. Oh my God, this is a big statement that he said. Okay, let me quickly take Monali Thakur's comment. Maybe. How do you think the outcome of this lawsuit will impact the lives of immigrants and their children born in the US, considering the potential consequences of denying birthright citizenship, such as loss of access to federal benefits, social security numbers, and voting rights? What do you have to say, John?
Yeah, I think the lawsuit is just going to preserve the status quo. So I think at the end of the day, we're going to see, people that are born in the United States getting citizenship, unless you're a diplomat's child. And I don't think it'll have any long-term effect, is my prediction. I think in the short term, the only impact that we're going to see is the State Department potentially not issuing passports. And so, people who have newly born children that haven't gotten a passport yet, they may have to sit in place before they can travel with their kid.
Okay. Okay, so Manali, I hope you have got your answer. In case you want maybe more answers, you can continue writing or posting your follow-ups. Meanwhile, let me take Ram's question. Ram says, how does this lawsuit affect the immigrant communities who are already living in the US as permanent residents or asylum seekers? Could their children be impacted even if they are illegal, even if they are legally here?
Yeah, again, the only thing that's going to be impacted, I think, long term is, or short term rather, is the issuance of passports. That's, the only thing that's going to be a problem. I think, at the end of the day, at the end of the lawsuit, we will go back to status quo. There won't be any changes. And, anybody born here in the US, except for diplomats' kids, will get birthright citizenship.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ram, for your question. Continue posting your follow-ups if you have more. And let me take Girish's questions in the meanwhile. Girish says there are people saying that this lawsuit is just a political move. Do you think there's any validity to that argument, or do you believe there are strong legal reasons behind challenging birthright citizenship?
Well, so just to be clear, the lawsuit is challenging the executive order, and the executive order is the one that's attacking birthright citizenship. So, do I think the executive order is a political stunt? 100%. I think any legitimate, thinking lawyer realizes that this is going to die, that the courts are going to shoot this down. So it's definitely a political stunt. And you know, in terms of whether or not ending birthright citizenship has merits, that's a question that is going to have to be resolved through a lot of debate over time, and it's going to have to go through a constitutional change that's going to require a lot of public participation and input. And I think even if we did see changes to birthright citizenship, I think we're looking at years and years and years down the road.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Girish, for your question. If you have follow-up, please continue posting them. Meanwhile, let me take Arpita's question also. Arpita says, what's the long-term impact of this lawsuit for immigrants who are still hoping to become US citizens? Would it make it more difficult for families to navigate the citizenship process in the future?
I think if you're here and you're on that path, it's not going to have any impact on you, because all the executive order is doing is trying to limit, going forward from the date of that executive order, who qualifies as a U.S. citizen, when you're born here. So the lawsuit, the long-term impact of that is just returning us back to where we were at the day before that executive order, and how citizenship is dealt with. Now, whether or not USCIS and the Department of Homeland Security are going to make the naturalization process more difficult for people and for applicants, that is a possibility. I mean, that's something the executive order can do, or that the executive branch rather can do pretty easily, just by saying this is a higher priority. We need to investigate people more thoroughly. We need to make sure they qualify. Yeah, all of those things can impact the naturalization process. But in terms of birthright citizenship, the executive order's impact is going to be very short-term, temporary, and limited. And I think we will return to birthright citizenship very soon.
Okay, okay. Sarvesh is also here, and Sarvesh wants to know that what role do you think international human rights law, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on the Human Rights of the Child, might play in shaping the court's decision, particularly with regards to principle of non-discrimination and the protection of vulnerable population, including immigrant children?
Yeah, so when it comes to international law, the courts don't really give it a whole lot of credence, to be honest. Yeah, if you make international law arguments in a federal court in the United States, it's like, oh, that's cute, that's nice, that's interesting. But anyway, let's focus on the real issue. Very, very, very few cases in the American judicial process have ever turned on immigration or international law. And so I wouldn't expect those conventions to sway anybody in the court.
Okay. Okay. Let me quickly take Sanjay's question also. Sanjay says, how might the judicial outcome of this birthright citizenship case influence the evolutionary trajectory of US citizenship laws, and what potential far-reaching consequences could emerge for the future landscape of American immigration policy? What do you have to say, John?
So I think in terms of naturalization policy, again, the executive order limiting birthright citizenship, I don't think is going to stand. I've been pretty clear about that. But changes to the naturalization process could take the form of statutory changes, limiting who's eligible for naturalization. That is something Congress can totally do, and they're authorized to do. And frankly, if Congress creates rules on naturalization that are more difficult, those are going to stand. The courts aren't going to overturn those. And so, that'll just be at the end of the political process, the political debate and codification of the law. So, if you look at our Congress, we haven't really accomplished any major legislation or major policy changes, especially in immigration, in decades. So I'm not expecting anything, dire or dramatic to happen anytime soon, just because, the procedure used in Congress to get things done is very unwieldy, very difficult, and, hot issues, difficult issues tend not to get resolved because they're too difficult to resolve.
Okay. Thank you so much, John, for answering all these questions. I think we have covered all the questions from the viewers as well. But with that, I would also like to know from you that what more can we expect? It's just been a day since Trump has taken the office, but what more can we expect in terms of, what might happen to immigrants and immigration policies and visas? So what more can we expect?
I think if you're outside the US, you can expect the consular process to be much more difficult, much more limited. I think they will scale back appointments. They'll make everything as hard as possible to get a visa. And then at the port of entry, there's going to be much more scrutiny. So if there's anything in your immigration history that's been flagged, you're not going to know about it until you get to the port of entry. And you may face questions about something that happened a decade ago, in your immigration process. So I think those types of things are what we should expect, especially for the H-1B population. I expect that the FDNS, which is a branch of USCIS that is like their immigration Gestapo, that goes out and does these visits and harasses H-1Bs. I think those investigations are going to increase dramatically. And the important thing for that population to understand is that they have a right to a lawyer in that situation. And having a lawyer represent you in those cases is about the only way that you can protect yourself from getting bullied and pushed around and, having your statements twisted and mischaracterized in some report that is going to impact your immigration future forever. So I would say get with an attorney immediately, have what's called a Form G-28 signed between you and the attorney. And if there's ever a FDNS officer that shows up on your doorstep or comes to your work, give them a copy of that G-28 and say, I have a right to a lawyer. I'm using that right. Please contact my lawyer for further inquiries on this issue, and leave it at that. And don't let yourself get bullied into talking further.
That's a great advice. Thank you so much for that, John. And guys, if you want to directly get in touch with John, make sure that you give him a call on the number 844-592-7336. Yes, I would like to repeat the number 844-592-7336. You can also email him. His email ID is support@wasden.law. And you can also visit his website, which is www.wasden.law. So make sure that you give him a call, reach out to him on his email, and you can also visit his website. Thank you so much, John, for being here. It was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for your insightful answers on all these trending questions. People are really looking to get an answer for these questions. So thank you so much for answering them in so much detail and depth. And we're looking forward to doing another great episode with you on another great topic. But until we meet again, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's good talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. And to our lovely viewers, thank you so much for posting so many questions of yours, and we enjoyed taking them. Thank you so much for that. And we are going to see you very soon in another webinar. And we are going to have another webinar at 12, so make sure that you tune into that. And if you want to get in touch with me, my number is 732-707-9151. My email is rajni@staffingly.com. So if you have any queries for me, make sure that you give me a call, send me a text, or maybe email me. But for now, I'll have to take your leave. I'll be seeing you soon on another webinar. But for now, I'll have to take your leave. Make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this episode with anyone looking for answers to these questions. But for now, have a great day. And I'm Rajni, signing off. Bye. Take care.